It's Velveeta versus cheddar. Our Velveeta melts much better.
This looks like cheese, right? But it isn't. This syrup, no maple tree involved. And this was literally held together with wood pulp and sold to the consumer as Parmesan cheese. In the United States, you are likely eating food that's banned or tightly regulated in much of Europe. And no one's telling you, because technically, they don't have to. In comparison to much of the European Union, there are far fewer protections on food labeling. And the ones that are there are only subject to what a reasonable consumer would believe. This was, in fact, the basis for a U.S. district judge's dismissal of a Pop-Tart lawsuit in Chicago. No reasonable consumer would believe that the filling in a Pop-Tart contained a certain amount of strawberries based on the image on the package and its use of the term strawberry. But fake foods aren't just misleading. They're also becoming incredibly common. According to a new analysis led by researchers at Johns Hopkins, they found that more than half of the calories consumed at home by adults in the United States come from ultra-processed foods. So what is fake food exactly? And how did America become the imitation nation while Europe said no? Well, let's take a look. Fake food, or imitation food, is a legally defined category in the United States. It looks like food, it's sold like food, but it's chemically or structurally altered to be cheaper, longer lasting, and more marketable. Some examples: pasteurized processed cheese product, non-dairy whipped topping, bacon bits with no bacon, wasabi from chemicals, vanilla without the bean, and truffle oil that's really just canola oil with a chemical flavorant. Same with this 100% cranberry juice. 100% juice blend cranberry. It is disclosed, but the size of the font in the blend versus cranberry seems a bit misleading, don't you think? And listen, I get it. Part of this comes down to economics. It takes over 40 gallons of maple sap just to make one jug of real maple syrup. That's why a single bottle costs over $10 and your local grocery store is flooded with a plethora of imitation syrups that don't have any maple sap at all. But hey, they're easier on your pocketbook. But the growing falsification of our foods means that literal tons of items on grocery store shelves and on restaurant plates are imitations of the real thing. Because the push for healthier, low-fat, low-sodium, low-sugar, and low-cost options in processed foods sounds great on paper, but it often means cutting out the very ingredients that gave our childhood favorites their nostalgia. No, really, the food of your childhood did taste different, and the legality of this practice is a bit fuzzy at best. Officially, the US does have laws on food labeling to prevent this deception on food labels. Both the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, and the Food Safety and Inspection Service, the FSIS, have regulations and guidance documents governing food labeling claims. But so long as there have been rules, companies have been quick to find the loophole. For example, while the US agreed to discontinue the labeling of sparkling wine as champagne in a 2006 wine trade agreement with the European Union, you can still find California champagne on store shelves today. Now, some people have pushed back on this. Lawsuits, often class action lawsuits, are brought when the label does not reflect the content of the product.
Unbelievable! I always wanted to know how you elves got the stripes on your fudge stripe cookies.
So for example, some lawsuits like fudge cookies containing no butter, whole wheat crackers made mostly of refined flour, smokehouse almonds not cooked with real smoke. You get my point. Many of the lawsuits cite the 1975 Magnuson-Moss Warranties Act, which governs warranties on consumer products at the federal level. While the act does not directly address food labeling, it can be indirectly relevant when food labeling claims are considered warranties. In one example, the Godiva chocolatier faced a class action lawsuit for deceptive labeling due to its Belgium 1926 packaging, despite the chocolate being made in the United States. The lawsuit alleged that the labeling led consumers to believe that the chocolate was made in Belgium, implying higher quality and origin. Godiva argued the label indicated the company's founding year and location, but the court sided with the consumers, leading to a $20 million settlement. But despite the picture that I've painted thus far, not all fake food is bad, and in many cases you might prefer it for your own ethical reasons, like having oat milk in your latte or a Beyond Beef patty in your burger. And fake foods have also allowed those with dietary restrictions and allergies to enjoy a much broader array of dishes, like with imitation crab, which is generally considered safe to eat during pregnancy because it is typically made from cooked pollock and other ingredients that are low in mercury. But before I get too ahead of myself, I think it's important that we go back and briefly ask, how did we get here?
Mother Murphy, lucky me. My wife uses Swanson TV turkey dinners. And make your husband lucky, too.
After World War II, workers needed convenience, and food companies stepped in, offering frozen dinners, processed cheese, and powdered eggs. Shelf life became king, and flavor came from chemistry. But we didn't go from scratch-made to science experiment overnight. Originally, those quick pre-made meals were still mostly recognizable, and perhaps the best example of this is also the most universal: cheese. Cheesemaking, which began 10,000 years ago, was originally about survival for a farm family or community, taking a very perishable protein and transforming it into something less perishable, so that there would be something to eat at a later date. Processed cheese, which was invented 107 years ago in Switzerland, is basically cheese that is emulsified and cooked, rendering it much less perishable. But also no longer a living food, because unlike natural cheese, processed cheese's flavor will no longer alter with age. But big American cheese producers, as part of our factory scale, go big or go home philosophy of food production, bought into processed cheese so heavily that the very definition of American cheese has come to be a processed product. And the most iconic of them all? Well, I may be biased, but for me, it's that blue box of Kraft macaroni and cheese.
Okay, boys, come and get it.
Kraft home-cooked dinners, the quick kind you cook up fresh.
Hitting the store shelves in 1937, the box promised to feed a family of 4 for just 19 cents. And while launching a new product during the Great Depression was certainly a gamble, the product was wildly successful, selling 8 million boxes in the first year. Food rationing during World War II kept the product's popularity soaring. 2 boxes of a Kraft dinner could be purchased for 1 rationing coupon. In the 1950s, the fan favorite only had 6 ingredients, with sharp cheddar and skim milk being the most predominant. However, real cheese is also real expensive. So in the 1980s, while cheese was still a predominant but lesser ingredient, buttermilk powder was added to compensate. This still gave the nostalgic meal its creamy, cheesy taste that, as a kid in the 1990s, I loved. However, fast forward to the 2000s, both of those items have largely disappeared, while the ingredients list has gotten longer and more chemical. But I don't want to single out Kraft too much here, because today our grocery store shelves are stocked with all kinds of near cheese items, from easy cheese to Velveeta, again, that type of processed cheese when it was invented in 1918, now a dairy-based processed food with 22 ingredients that is no longer regulated as cheese, but rather a pasteurized prepared cheese product. To their credit, the FDA has established SOIs, or Standards of Identity, for over 250 foods, defining their characteristics, ingredients, and sometimes production methods. For example, you can't just market yourself as a fruit jam if you don't include at least 45% fruit. And similarly, whole wheat bread must be made with 100% whole wheat flour. This again is why Velveeta was asked to not call themselves cheese any longer in the early 2000s. The homogeneous orange slime, which admittedly makes for a great queso, just really isn't cheese by the FDA's definition anymore. But while SOIs do help to thwart food fraud, they're not about preserving quality, heritage, or freshness, but rather consistency with consumer expectations. And that's where I think a trip across the pond is needed to explain this difference. In a few other videos, I've explored and explained the EU's adoption of the precautionary principle, meaning prove it safe first. And I'll drop links to both my video on beef and chicken in the description of this video if you would like to watch more. And to a significant degree, the precautionary principle has kept many of the food additives, chemicals, and preservatives out of the food that we consume here in Europe. There's a higher burden to bear on behalf of the manufacturers that the chemicals that they're using in foods are safe before entering the market, rather than discovering afterwards and removing it from the store shelves. However, the presence and power of protected foods and labels is something that I don't think gets enough attention. These labels not only protect a heritage of food culture, but help consumers to more easily recognize and prefer the real deal over imitation foods. According to the European Commission, a protected designation of origin is a legal label that establishes certain requirements for labeling traditional foods and wines. The idea is that something about a place's geography and climate just simply can't be replicated, and copying the name without producing the food properly can devalue the product. So, for example, Kalamata olive oil, PDO, is entirely produced in the region of Kalamata in Greece, using olive varieties from that area. Champagne can only come from the Champagne region of France. Feta is a traditional Greek cheese made from unpasteurized sheep or goat milk. It is not a generic name and must come from Greece if sold in the EU. Gouda cheese must come from a specific region of the Netherlands. Irish whiskey must be distilled and manufactured in Ireland. Black Forest ham from the Schwarzwald. Roquefort blue cheese from France. Bordeaux wine, Gorgonzola, Chianti. You get what I'm saying. But sadly, it is very difficult to protect these foods and their reputation from copycats once you leave the EU. And here again, cheese is a great example. In the European Union, Parmigiano Reggiano is a PDO cheese, meaning it can only be made in a specific region of Italy using traditional methods and ingredients. The cows that produce the milk can only eat grass and hay from pure pastures and cannot receive antibiotics or supplements. The cheese-making process must begin within 18 hours of milking, and the cheese can only include milk, rennet, which is a naturally occurring complex of enzymes used to make cheese, and salt. A standard size wheel of cheese is produced, one that hasn't changed for hundreds of years, and it must be cared for and aged for at least 1 year before it's sold. Meanwhile, in the United States, all kinds of cheeses are passed off as Parmesan. Whether you're in a restaurant or buying a pre-grated package, it could be Pecorino Romano or Gran Padano. In the worst cases, they may not even be cheese, as a particularly bad scandal revealed. Some of those canisters of cheese contained cellulose or wood pulp. Seriously. But even if you consider foods that don't directly have a protected geographical or designation, there is still a much greater degree of emphasis and legal protection on the sourcing and quality of foods consumed. The EU has a comprehensive farm-to-fork strategy that aims to create fair, healthy, and environmentally friendly food systems. This strategy includes measures to combat food fraud, with a focus on transparency and traceability throughout the food supply chain, including origin disclosure and labeling, requiring information about where food products come from. Every single item in the produce section of my chain grocery store lists where it comes from, and the local or regional products are highlighted. The flour for my cake, I can see which mill it was produced from. And all of these things taken together, the protection of foods that carry geographic and cultural heritage, as well as a food system which mandates transparency and traceability, means that when consumers head to their grocery store, they're not only better informed consumers, but they reinforce a system that benefits local businesses by fostering trust, enhancing product value, and enabling those businesses to meet increasing consumer demand for sustainable and ethical food sources without increasing the cost. So while Europe protected real food with real laws, the United States protected corporate innovation. At least for now. Every year, it seems like there is an ever-growing awareness of the link between diet and health, including obesity, allergies, and chronic diseases, prompting consumers to scrutinize food ingredients and nutritional value. Consumers are seeking foods with fewer artificial additives and preservatives, leading to the rise of clean label products and grocery stores that cater to whole, healthy foods. But sadly, this trend is one that comes at a cost that many people just simply cannot afford. Processed foods tend to have a lot more calories at a lower price. That's more bang for your buck than fresh food if you're on a budget. One piece of British research in 2023, the Broken Plate Report by the Food Foundation, found that healthy food is usually twice as expensive as less healthy food on a per-calorie basis. However, buying cheaper, less healthy food can prove to be a false economy, leading to health conditions, income losses, increased living costs, and medical expenses. One Harvard study found that unhealthy diets result in $50 billion in additional healthcare costs every year, with copays and rising insurance premiums inflating American household bills. There are some heritage foods which have been legally protected in the United States, but the few examples that do exist are contained to state-level laws. For example, in Tennessee, whiskey is a protected name. In Tennessee, the state law, House Bill 1084, defines Tennessee whiskey and mandates that it must be produced in Tennessee, meet the definition of bourbon, including a grain mixture with at least 51% corn, and undergo the Lincoln County process, a charcoal mellowing. It is also protected under agreements like NAFTA, now the USMCA, and in the EU, recognizing it as a distinctive product of the United States, specifically produced in Tennessee. Vidalia onions are another of these rare examples where an American crop is considered unique enough to deserve protected labeling. The Vidalia Onion Act of 1986 codified into state law that only onions grown in 20 specific counties in Georgia can legally use the name. And while I think that these are a great start, they remain specialties and not standards. The real tragedy, in my opinion, for Americans is that many just don't know what they're missing when they get a low-quality imitation of a truly good food. Now, in most cases, these legal imitations won't harm anyone physically, but they do affect the reputation and livelihood of the people who dedicate their lives to making these foods. Most can't compete with the cheap commercialized imitations, and those that do often have to sell at a price that makes them unattainable for the standard American family diet. And that's relevant for foods like Parmesan cheese and olive oil, but also something as simple as a tomato. Food for thought. But I would love to know what you think. Have you discovered a product that you thought was real, but wasn't? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed what you saw today, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. And for more content from Type Ashton, hit that subscribe button. So I'll see you in the next video. Tschüss!